The automatic doors hummed open with a soft whoosh, parting to reveal the quiet buzz of Martin's supermarket in Fairfax, Virginia. Samuel stepped inside, his tailored gray blazer cutting a sharp contrast against the more relaxed attire of weekend shoppers. His presence, though calm and collected, seemed to ripple through the space as if drawing invisible lines through the aisles. This wasn't a casual visit, Samuel was here with purpose. His steps were measured, deliberate, his eyes scanning the shelves as though there was more to observe than just the products on display. As he passed an elderly man shuffling by with a basket of oranges, Samuel gave a brief nod. Then, he made his way to the produce section, the soft click of his shoes against the polished floor echoing louder than expected in the otherwise mundane setting. Behind the register, a young cashier leaned toward her colleague, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know that guy? He's been walking around like he's up to something." Her coworker glanced over, shrugging nonchalantly. "I've never seen him before. Maybe he's just looking for something." But the whispers didn't stop there. As Samuel reached for a Granny Smith apple, another employee, a stocky man named Carl, approached him cautiously, his neutral expression betraying a flicker of unease. "Excuse me, sir," Carl said, his voice steady but firm. "Do you need help finding anything?" Samuel, polite but visibly confused, replied, "No, thank you. I'm just looking around." Carl hesitated, his gaze scanning Samuel, measuring his every move as though weighing the situation. "It's just that you've been walking around for a while. Are you sure there's nothing you're looking for?" Samuel's brow furrowed slightly, and his tone sharpened ever so slightly. "I'm sure. Is there a problem?" A subtle tension thickened the air, palpable to even the casual shoppers passing by. A woman with a cart full of groceries halted in her tracks, her eyes flicking between the two men. Another customer leaned in closer to the shelf, feigning interest in the labels, but the truth was clear, he was listening intently. Samuel exhaled, his patience fraying just a bit. He pulled out his phone to check a notification, his motion smooth, almost rehearsed. But Carl, watching closely, zeroed in on the movement, his jaw tightening. "I'm going to have to ask you to step over here," Carl said, gesturing toward the customer service counter. But Samuel stood firm, his demeanor unwavering, as the quiet hum of the supermarket turned into a low murmur of suspicion. He was no longer just a shopper, he was the subject of scrutiny. A few customers had stopped entirely now, their curiosity outweighing their need for groceries. Out of the corner of his eye, Samuel noticed another employee speaking into a small radio, calling for the store manager. Samuel kept his ground, his voice even as he addressed Carl once again. "I'm not sure why this is necessary. I've told you, I'm just looking around." Carl crossed his arms, his posture rigid. "We have policies, sir. If we notice unusual behavior, we're obligated to investigate." Samuel raised an eyebrow, his gaze steady. "Unusual behavior? I've picked up one apple. Is that your concern?" The murmurs in the store grew louder, a teenage boy whispering to his mother, who quickly hushed him. An elderly woman, likely intrigued by the growing scene, squinted her eyes, trying to catch a glimpse. By now, the store manager had arrived. Greg, wiry in mid-40s, stood at the edge of the crowd. His tie was slightly askew, his posture tense, as though he'd been pulled from somewhere urgent. "What seems to be the problem here?" Greg asked, stepping between Carl and Samuel, his voice betraying a hint of frustration. Carl pointed to Samuel. "This gentleman has been wandering the aisles, acting suspicious. I think we need to check his bags." Samuel blinked, his confusion now turning into disbelief. "I don't even have bags." Greg hesitated, scanning Samuel from head to toe, taking in the tailored blazer, the polished shoes, the expensive watch peeking out from under his sleeve. For a moment, it seemed as though he might reconsider, perhaps thinking better of escalating things. But then his voice returned, cautious but firm. "Sir, we'd like to take a closer look. Just to clear this up." Samuel's lips pressed into a thin line, and he glanced around at the small gathering of onlookers. The weight of their assumptions hung heavy in the air, silent but deafening, as if their stares alone could drown out any rational explanation. "I see," Samuel said quietly, his words measured. "And what exactly are you looking for?" Greg shifted uncomfortably, his gaze avoiding Samuel's. "We're just doing our due diligence. If you cooperate, this will be over quickly." A ripple of discomfort spread through the crowd, a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt muttering under his breath as he shook his head. Samuel sighed, frustration creeping in. He set the apple back where it came from and reached into his jacket pocket once more. This time, he pulled out a slim leather wallet. "Let's save everyone some trouble," Samuel said, flipping the wallet open to reveal a business card. He held it out to Greg, who hesitated before taking it. As Greg's eyes scanned the card, his face drained of color, his voice barely a whisper. "Owner?" Samuel nodded slowly, his voice carrying enough authority to silence the room. "Yes. I'm the owner." Before anyone could respond, the weight of what had just been revealed sank over the entire room. Stunned silence replaced the murmurs as all eyes turned toward Samuel. Greg stood frozen, the business card trembling slightly in his hand, as if he was struggling to process what had just happened. He opened his mouth, as if to speak, but no words came out. Carl, now standing behind Greg, took a step back, his earlier confidence drained from his face. "Wait, you're the owner?" His voice was barely audible. Samuel nodded, his expression unwavering. "Yes. I'm Samuel Green, the new owner of Martin's Supermarket. I acquired it just last month." Clearly, not everyone was informed. Greg's face turned an alarming shade of red, as he scrambled to regain composure. "Mr. Green, I didn't know. We weren't told." Samuel raised a hand, silencing him. "It's not about what you didn't know. It's about what you assumed." The crowd, which had been drawn to the spectacle, began to disperse. Some were embarrassed by their earlier gawking, others lingered in silent fascination. An elderly man, leaning on his cart, muttered under his breath, "That's what happens when people jump to conclusions." Greg cleared his throat, glancing nervously at Carl, who was now staring at the floor. "Mr. Green, I deeply apologize for this misunderstanding. We had no intention of—" Samuel interrupted, his voice sharp. "Don't explain it away. I think we all know what this was." Carl, who had stood stoically through the confrontation, now seemed to shrink under Samuel's steady gaze. For a moment, it seemed he might argue, but he didn't. Greg shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room, as if he were hoping the earth might open up and swallow him whole. Samuel let out a slow breath, his posture easing slightly. "Thank you all for your patience," he said, his voice calm. "I think we've given everyone enough of a show for today." Some in the crowd nodded, a few murmured quiet apologies, and the tension began to dissolve as shoppers returned to their business. But Samuel wasn't finished yet. He turned back to Greg and Carl, his expression hardening. "We're not sweeping this under the rug," he said, his voice firm. "I'll be calling an all-staff meeting tomorrow to address what happened here and why it should never happen again." As Samuel walked away, the weight of the moment lingered in the air, an uncomfortable realization settling over everyone. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a lesson, and it was one that wouldn't be easily forgotten. The room was thick with an unspoken tension. Employees sat scattered in a semicircle, their fidgeting hands occasionally reaching for name tags, their eyes stealing quick, nervous glances toward Samuel at the front. He stood tall, no longer wearing his usual blazer, but still commanding the space in his simple button-down shirt. Despite the shift in attire, his presence was as powerful as ever. "Thank you all for being here," Samuel began, his voice calm, yet firm, carrying a weight that held the room in place. "Yesterday was uncomfortable, to say the least. And I think it's time we talk about why." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. No one spoke. Not a single one of you. Not even Greg, who usually dominates meetings. Samuel continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. He sat there with his hands clasped, looking as pale as a ghost. The room fell into silence, and Samuel let it stretch, his eyes meeting theirs, giving them space to feel the gravity of his words. Let me start by saying this isn't about assigning blame. It's about understanding the choices we make, the assumptions that guide those choices, and why we sometimes don't even notice them. He took a step forward, making the moment feel more intimate, more real. Yesterday, I walked into my own store, Samuel said, his voice dropping just slightly. And I was treated like a suspect. He let the statement settle, each word leaving a mark. Why? He asked, looking around the room. Because I didn't look like what you expected an owner to look like. A few heads dropped in recognition. Carl shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw tight, but words seemed to escape him. Samuel could feel the weight of the moment. I've reviewed the security footage, he continued. I saw how the whispers started, how the stares lingered, and how the situation quickly escalated. His eyes softened, a hint of vulnerability creeping in. At no point did anyone stop to question if what they were assuming was fair. He leaned slightly on the edge of the table, his voice quieter now, almost soothing. I get it. Not everyone here knows me yet. But how I was treated wasn't just about familiarity, it was about perception. And that is a problem we need to address. With a deliberate motion, Samuel gestured to a whiteboard behind him. 2 bold words were written across it, implicit bias. Let's talk about this, he said, his voice calm yet insistent. Bias isn't always malicious, he continued, his eyes scanning the room, sometimes it's subtle. It's the quick judgment you make when someone doesn't fit into the box you've created in your mind. But those small judgments can have massive consequences. A young cashier raised her hand hesitantly, almost unsure of herself. Mr. Green. I think a lot of us didn't even realize what we were doing, she stammered, her voice small but genuine. It's like it just happened. Samuel nodded, acknowledging her honesty. That's exactly why we're talking about it, he said. Awareness is the first step. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. The room was silent again, but this time, it felt less like tension and more like reflection, a quiet moment where everyone was beginning to absorb the weight of what had been said. Taking a marker in his hand, Samuel wrote a simple question on the whiteboard: what assumptions do we make without realizing it? Let's hear from you, he said, turning back to the group. What comes to mind? For a long beat, no one spoke. Then, Carl, who had been eerily quiet up until now, cleared his throat. I guess. I assumed someone dressed like you wouldn't be the owner, he admitted, his voice almost apologetic. That's on me. I wasn't thinking. Samuel nodded, his expression thoughtful, and gave Carl a small, appreciative smile. Thank you for saying that, he replied. And it's not just about me. It's about how we treat anyone who walks through those doors. Every customer, every colleague deserves respect. He glanced at Greg, who seemed to snap out of his daze and finally spoke. This, Greg said, voice cracking slightly, this was a wake-up call. We need to do better. Not just for you, but for everyone. Samuel straightened up, his face breaking into a small but genuine smile. Exactly. We can do better. And it starts with conversations like this. As the meeting wrapped up and employees slowly filtered out, their faces thoughtful and subdued, it was clear that the work was just beginning. Over the next week, Samuel set a series of changes into motion, ones that would ripple through the store and beyond. First, he introduced mandatory training on implicit bias and customer interactions. The sessions weren't lectures, they were discussions. Employees were encouraged to share their experiences, not only in the workplace but in their lives outside of it. The first session was led by Samuel himself. He stood in front of a diverse group of staff members, his voice steady but passionate. I want this place to be more than just a supermarket, he said. It should be a space where everyone feels valued, staff and customers alike. The training included real-life scenarios, exercises where employees split into groups and discussed how they would handle specific situations, like a teenager browsing expensive items or an elderly woman lingering near the checkout without purchasing anything. Many found these conversations eye-opening. "I didn't realize how often I make assumptions," said Rachel, a part-time cashier in her 20s. "It's not something I'm proud of, but I'm glad we're talking about it." Carl, who had been so hesitant before, surprised everyone by taking an active role. "I thought I understood people," he said, "but these conversations made me realize just how much I still have to learn." The changes didn't stop there. Samuel also introduced a suggestion box near the store entrance, inviting customers to share their experiences anonymously. A simple sign next to it read, "Help us improve. Your voice matters." To Samuel's surprise, many of the notes praised the staff for their newfound warmth and attentiveness, a testament to how quickly the environment had shifted. One Saturday afternoon, Samuel held an open meeting in the store's parking lot. Standing on a small platform, he addressed a crowd of shoppers, employees, and passers-by. "We all have blind spots," he began, his voice rising above the murmurs. "The important thing is what we do when we see them." He paused, scanning the crowd. "This store isn't just about transactions. It's about people. And every person who walks through these doors deserves kindness, respect, and fairness." The crowd erupted in applause, some nodding in agreement, others visibly moved by his words. Samuel stepped down from the platform, shaking hands and thanking attendees for their support. As the crowd began to disperse, a middle-aged woman approached him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you for doing this," she said softly. "I've been coming to this store for years, and it feels different now. In a good way." Samuel smiled, his heart swelling with quiet pride. "That's all I wanted," he said. "To make a difference." But even as the store began to thrive under its new leadership, Samuel knew that real change wasn't a one-time event. It was a continuous effort, a daily choice to see people for who they truly were. Months later, Martin's supermarket was unrecognizable, not because of renovations or new products, but because of the transformation in its atmosphere. The once palpable tension had been replaced with a warm, welcoming energy. Gone were the days of guarded glances and whispered judgments. Employees now greeted every customer with genuine smiles, and customers returned the warmth, often striking up friendly conversations with the staff. The store had become more than just a place to shop, it was a community, a space where everyone felt valued. Samuel walked through the aisles one afternoon, observing the new rhythm of the store. There was a sense of ease in the air. The staff moved confidently, interacting with customers in a way that was both professional and personal. As he made his way toward the checkout lanes, a young boy dashed up to him, tugging at his sleeve. "Are you the owner?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. Samuel chuckled and knelt down to meet his gaze. "I am." "Why do you ask?" "My mom says you're the guy who made this place nicer," the boy replied, smiling shyly. Behind him, his mother gave a sheepish wave. Samuel's heart swelled as he stood, glancing toward the employees who were diligently working, embodying the change they had all worked so hard to create. "Well, it wasn't just me. It was everyone here," he said, gesturing toward the bustling staff. "It takes a team to make real change." The boy nodded seriously, as though the weight of his words had made an impact, before skipping back to his mother. Samuel watched them leave, his chest tight with quiet pride. In that moment, he realized how far the store had come. The real measure of success wasn't in sales or foot traffic, it was in the way people interacted with each other, the genuine respect and kindness they extended. That evening, as he locked up the store and turned off the lights, Samuel paused. The journey had started with a single uncomfortable moment, but it had blossomed into something far greater. It wasn't just about fixing one isolated incident, it was about creating a culture that prioritized empathy over assumptions, fairness over fear. Before he left for the night, Samuel walked over to the employee message board and wrote in bold, clear letters, "Respect is the foundation of every great team. Let's keep building." With that, he turned off the lights and smiled. This wasn't just a job, or a store, it was a legacy, and he was determined to make sure it was one worth leaving behind. This story reminds us of the power of awareness, humility, and collective effort. We all carry biases, but by confronting them with honesty and empathy, we can transform spaces into places where everyone feels seen, valued, and respected. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to consider how you can challenge your own assumptions and work to foster understanding in your own community. Share this story with others, subscribe for more impactful stories, and let's keep the conversation going.